Let's finish this quickly.
I'm on the job.
I am the God Killer.
Some people say it's wonderful. To me, compared to the Save America Act, just about everything is a big yawn.
But yeah, big yawn from Trump, it does make sense. This probably does feel boring and unimportant, especially compared to, chances where he can enrich himself and his family by at least $2 billion just in the last year and a half. But for everyday Americans who can't manipulate and abuse the power of the presidency to line their pockets, the housing affordability crisis is a very real issue. The median home price, it's now 5 times more than the annual income of a typical family, and the cost of home ownership, it's hit record highs. And then there's also a severe supply shortage regarding houses that are available. The United States is looking down the barrel of a shortfall of millions of homes, and houses are not being built fast enough. But in the meantime, what you're seeing is that you got people like J.D. Vance having the audacity to claim that it's the Democrats who are somehow preventing a solution for the housing affordability crisis.
I would love it if Democrats were willing, not that they are going to agree with Republicans all the time, but if they were willing to work with us on lowering housing prices, on lowering gas prices, on actually making the lives of American citizens better, we could have some real bipartisan compromise.
My brother in Christ, though hopefully not soon. I don't know how you haven't gotten excommunicated by the Catholic Church yet. The Democrats did reach a bipartisan compromise on housing affordability. Trump is literally the only reason it is not a law. And it's absolutely insane to say that Democrats are refusing to reach a compromise on lowering gas prices when the only reason that prices are so fucking high is because of Trump's war of choice. A war that most Dems have opposed from the start. And I say most because there are some that secretly are a fan of it, right? Initially dragged their feet just to see how things would play out. But unfortunately, right now, the power lies with the Republicans in this Republican White House with Trump and J.D. Vance, and they seem kind of more fixated on gaslighting than actually signing the solution. Right? I guess their winning strategy right now is to just gaslight Americans, to let them know that their lived experience, that's a lie. You're not actually suffering. Which I will say is the wildest strategy they could have possibly stolen from a number of establishment Democrats. They seemingly took that and just supercharged it with extra stupid. These corrupt, lazy motherfuckers have me crashing out today. And then there's more we gotta dive into in just a minute, but first let me thank the sponsor and say, for those of us still working on something for over a year now and you still haven't gotten that website up, I need you to ask yourself this. Are you actually closer to launching than you were 6 months ago? And that's not a jab, right? That's just what happens when the build feels harder than the idea. Squarespace, they make the build stupid simple, right? If you have no website, no problem. Today, that changes because Squarespace makes it so easy to make that site. You can start selling content, courses, physical or digital products. Truly, whatever you've been dreaming up, you can probably do. Their beacon tools will literally draft your site copy, suggest your layout, design your pages. You just describe what you want and it builds around you. No coding, no guesswork, just results. So whether it's low end, you just want to showcase things, or high end, you want one-time payments, subscriptions, both. Do it all, right? And Beacon can help you design and build the business, and then Acuity handles the bookings. By the time that the first client finds you, everything's already ready for them. Now, once you're live, their built-in analytics and marketing tools, they keep everything running like clockwork, so you can just focus on what you actually care about. So stop with the procrastination. That comes from a former professional procrastinator. Your free trial, it's waiting for you at squarespace.com/Phil, or scan that QR code, because today is launch day. And just remember, when it's ready to go live, use code Phil to get 10% off, and just let them know we sent you. And then next up today, we've got to talk about Tim Walz getting absolutely slammed right now for issuing what may be one of the most controversial pardons ever. Because the pardon that you're looking at today is for Thao Veng. He's a 42-year-old immigrant from Thailand who came to the US as a child refugee in 1994. He then became a permanent resident and eventually settled in Minnesota. But most importantly, in 2005, when he was roughly 18 years old, he was convicted of repeatedly sexually abusing a 10-year-old girl. And while he initially tried to justify his actions, he ended up pleading guilty to avoid prison time, and an immigration judge ordered his deportation to Laos. But because at the time, Laos refused to accept deportees in large numbers, many people that would have been sent back ended up staying in the United States on supervised release. So here he stayed for 20 years, but then he got swept up in the ICE crackdown in Minnesota back in December, and now he's facing deportation again. And so what Veng did is that he filed for a pardon from the state, with him pointing to his decades of having a clean record since his conviction as evidence of his rehabilitation. He also expressed a regret for his actions, saying that he carries a deep shame and that if he could go back and change it, he wouldn't heartbeat. But also, it seemed to be the biggest deciding factor here came from his victim, because they ended up submitting an unsigned statement asking for the state to grant the pardon. Writing, "What happened to me was wrong, but I have had many years to think about this. I have made peace with it. I forgive him." So what you got is that the Board of Pardons, a 3-person panel including Governor Tim Walz, the State Attorney General Keith Ellison, and the State Supreme Court Justice Natalie Hudson, granting the pardon. They essentially wiped Vang's criminal record clean and gave him the chance to fight his deportation. So as you can imagine, the backlash has been massive. And among the reactions, you had the Department of Homeland Security saying on Twitter, "Governor Walz's pardon shielded this child rapist from removal from our nation," and adding, "This is the type of disgusting criminal sanctuary politicians are shamelessly protecting." And you had DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullin sharing the post and calling the pardon horrific and accusing Walz of protecting illegal criminal aliens over American citizens. And personally, I gotta say, kind of fuck Tim Walz and these other 2 board members for putting me on the same side as Markwayne Mullin. Right? I understand that they've shared that the victim chiming in on Vang's behalf, it played a major role in their decision. But one, I'm personally of an opinion that anyone that does something like this, they're a monster in my fucking eyes. They're a monster for life that can never be trusted. And then 2, just optically, this is fucking stupid politics. You have an administration that has been purging the country of so many non-criminals, even though they've said that they're focused on the dangerous criminals. And so y'all decide to protect someone who targeted a 10-year-old girl? And now listen, I looked through your statement. You made a less than subtle dig at Trump, pointing out that he's throwing pardons around like candy. Valid criticism. But what about your fucking pardon too, my guy? And overall, in my opinion, I found this disappointing, disgusting, and it feels like team politics taken to a stupid and dangerous place. But then actually, also speaking of team politics, we then have to talk about the news that Tucker Carlson is starting a third party. Right? He just officially announced it in an interview with the Columbia Journalism Review, just weeks after he declared that he was leaving the GOP over Trump's war with Iran and the party's deep support of Israel.
I would not support the Republican Party. There's no chance I would support the Republican Party. I've been a consistent defender for 35 years of the Republican Party. I mean, very consistent defender. But there's no defending this because it's immoral, and it's exactly the opposite of what a political party in a democracy is charged with doing, which is representing its own voters, its own citizens, its own nation, and they're not doing that. So, no, I'm out. And if I'm out, then I think a lot of other people are out.
And in this new interview with CJR, he echoed a lot of the same points, ragging on Trump and his war in Iran before then saying, "I'm going to help build a third party. There should be a good faith effort to figure out what benefits the country." And adding, "I mean, if you make $60,000 a year, you're degraded. Your life expectancy has gone down and the promise of your children's lives is likely gone. No one seems to care. It's not even a factor. What about Hamas? I officially do not care about Hamas. The US government should have, as its first priority, the welfare of its own people." And he went on to say that Democrats and Republicans are in lockstep solidarity with each other when it comes to war and finance and arguing. That's not a democracy. That's a one-party state posing as a democracy, and it needs to be broken. Though Tucker also said that he did not want to be a candidate for this future third party. And this, of course, is kind of just the latest and biggest update around the MAGA civil war that we've been covering for over a year now, right? And so far as the reception online, it's been kind of mixed. You did have a ton of people applauding the move, cheering Tucker on, saying that a new alternative to the GOP is very welcome. You also had some arguing that he could unite both the left and the right if he centers the new party around kind of a big tent populist platform. But then you also had plenty of people slamming this move, saying that it would just fracture conservative votes and ultimately make it easier for the Democrats to win. And then you also had other people saying, really, there's no way that a third party can actually gain any meaningful traction. And there, as you'd expect, you had a lot of people pointing to Elon Musk, or whether it was ketamine-induced or ego-driven or both. Elon famously said that he was going to start his own third party, and then he ultimately bailed. But that was around the time where Elon all of a sudden was in that fight with Trump. He started talking about the Epstein files. He was actually a big part of the reason why that popped back up and damaged Trump so much. Though, of course, as we've all witnessed, he then cozied back up to his daddy. But then also beyond all the other stuff with Tucker, you had people questioning his ability to actually build an effective third party, with many claiming that despite his large platform, many of his ideas, they might be seen as too fringe, with one person writing, "I like Tucker, but he can't build a new party because he's all over the place. None of his positions have any consistent underlying philosophy that would allow a solidified policy to take shape." You also had some on the far right, like Laura Loomer, who raised questions about how the whole thing's going to work logistically, given the current internal politics of American conservatism. Writing, now the question is, will JD Vance join the third party, or will he finally condemn and confront Tucker Carlson before Tucker torpedoes JD's 2028 GOP presidential campaign? And adding, obviously, JD isn't going to join a third party, so I think it's totally obvious now Tucker only says nice things about JD, but he clearly wants to hurt his presidential aspirations. Why would he run a party against JD? But then here's what I'll say with all this. No matter your opinion of Tucker Carlson, or the belief or disbelief in his ability to craft a new third party in America, what is undeniable is that there is a growing faction of Trump's base who no longer support him and the Republican Party, and they are being led by some of the most prominent conservative commentators in the country. All while poll after poll has shown that Trump, he's losing.
I used to be an Epic Games glazer. I am reformed now. I've seen Tim Sweeney for what he truly is, a dweeb, just a pathetic twerp. But there was a time when I was gushing grannies over the direction Epic Games was going. With their incredible success with Fortnite, unlocking the infinite money glitch, it really felt like they were actively trying to use that to help elevate other developers as well. And they had very generous splits with the community when it came to like custom content and like the Fortnite creator codes and stuff. Like the successful maps that the community makes on Fortnite, their program was giving them millions of dollars. Like a very unprecedented split with the people that were making that content. So for a while, I really was, pumping my fist like, hey, go Epic. Even though I'm not the biggest Fortnite fan, I just bought hook, line, and sinker into the idea that this was a company that actually did care about the industry and other developers as well as the community. And maybe some people in the company still do, but Tim Sweeney I don't think is one of them. The mask has fully slipped on this guy, and I'm seeing Voldemort for what he is. This guy fucking sucks. Dude loves to hit the Twitter sphere and drop the most cringe-inducing takes you'll see a gaming CEO unapologetically fart out. He's been going Insano style recently, just dropping bad take after bad take out the wazoo almost daily, so I wanted to go through a little montage of his lowlights. One of them that actually made me giggle really hard is how he loves to keep giving advice to Valve on how they can be more successful. Which is very tough talk coming from someone who has the goddamn Epic Games Store, an absolute joke of a platform that becomes synonymous with garbage. It is comical. People shoot spitballs at the Epic Games Store. It's a flop and everyone knows it. Yet he keeps piping up, chiming in, saying things like, Steam charges such high fees that companies like Genshin Impact maker MiHoYo find it more profitable to go it alone. But then had to be reminded from fans that MiHoYo has multiple games on Steam, so he can't even get anything right when it comes to offering unsolicited advice to a significantly more successful company. It feels like a child who keeps tugging on his dad's, coat. Like, give me attention, please. Gabe Newell, please, give me attention. Look, I'm trying to help. Look. It's just so embarrassing. Here's the full tweet here where he's making the statement. It comes as a reply to someone saying, it's Steam's fault that Epic won't put their games on there, apparently. Tim somehow finds this tweet and then says, here's what's happening economically. Steam charges such high fees that developers with strong brands and big enough audience, like Epic, Riot, and MiHoYo, find it more profitable to go it alone. Ironically, lower fees and more openness might increase Steam profit. Is that right, Tim? Why don't you try and focus this Galaxy Brain strategy on increasing profit for your completely dead and rotted Epic Games Store, man? You have your own platform, you know that, right? Why even trying to come out here like the savant in the industry on successful platforms? Steam not only dwarfs Epic Games Store, but fucking world stars it. Like, they Gangnam Style on top of Epic Games Store. And yet he keeps doing this shit constantly. And he's wrong, again, because MiHoYo has multiple games on Steam. It's just crazy. It's clear, because he has the Epic Games Store, he has to keep finding ways of trying to, passive-aggressively fight against Steam, because that's obviously their biggest competitor. But he's so bad at it. Now, in an interview with PC Gamer, which is where some of the conversation stems from, where Tim was talking about the whole kit and caboodle of future games AI, because Tim Sweeney has become a huge AI shill, and he had another wacky AI take just today we'll go over in a little bit. He was also asked about whether Valve would ever join forces with Epic. It's now clear that nobody's going to end up with an absolute monopoly. And then he goes into Team Open and his objections to Steam AI disclosure, by the way, which we're definitely going to talk about, because he is a big advocate for getting rid of the AI disclosure Steam requires when your game uses AI. But I want to start here. This is coming off of a previous question about if he ever sees a future where Valve and Epic work together. And he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. Because Gabe Newell occupies more of Tim Sweeney's mind than Epic Games Store actually does. I'm pretty sure he goes to bed thinking about Gabe Newell. He's probably got like a bubblegum statue like fucking Helga Pataki did for Arnold in Hey Arnold. He is constantly thinking about Valve and Gabe Newell. But anyway, off the back of that question about that Avengers team up there, he is then asked, do you think Valve can be convinced of that? They've got a nice thing going. So he says, we'll see. They have a nice thing going on PC, but they reach what percentage of the PC audience? You know, they don't reach any of the Fortnite audience. They don't have Fortnite and Riot Games and Genshin Impact. By the way, bro, they do have, like, the Hoyoverse audience. A lot of the MiHoYo games are on there. You're just literally wrong and refusing to even bother to get it right. And many other top games in the industry on Steam. They're missing out on a lot of opportunity that I think they could have if they took the more forward-looking open view that Epic has taken and Microsoft has taken. Microsoft Store charges 12%, really good deal. Google now giving all developers a better deal. Some really cool things coming for the future, so I think there really is the opportunity to form Team Open. Steam's got a pretty sweet business. A lot of gamers love Steam, but imagine if you could have Steam on all platforms. What if you could have it on iPhone? What if you could have it on Android? What if they carried a lot of games? Or what if they keep doing what they've been doing for the last 2 decades that's been working without a hitch? Nothing. Do nothing and win. They got it right. They've cemented themselves as the de facto platform everyone flocks to when it comes to a PC title. I don't see why they'd make some huge pivot just because Tim Sweeney says so and tries to offer alternative solutions to a non-existent problem that Steam has. Like, there are plenty of things you can criticize Steam for. I know I've done it quite a bit in the past, but in terms of every other platform on the market in this industry, they are still the best. The only one that even comes close is GOG, but they occupy a different niche. Nobody is willingly choosing the Epic Games Store over Steam if they have the choice. It just doesn't happen. So why the fuck is this guy trying to make it seem like it's even close or that there'd be any value in them teaming up and offering like these creative ideas on how to make it even better when all of his ideas for the Epic Games Store clearly don't work? And I also love that Tim Sweeney is parading around as the Team Open guy, giving the idea that he wants everything to be open, you know, transparent, collaborative, meanwhile also trying to push for Steam to remove the AI disclosures that they slap on games that use generative AI components and assets. Doesn't feel very open to me. I think there is nothing wrong with having that disclosure there, and in fact, I love when companies give consumers even more information on the products that they might be purchasing. And right now, AI in video games is something people care a lot about. Some people don't give a shit if there's AI there, so the AI disclosure doesn't matter to them, but there are people that do and don't want to just be playing slop. So it's nothing more than just giving consumers information on a product. That's it. Why is that a bad thing? Well, it's because Tim is a big AI guy, and he's not wrong that right now a lot of people don't want it, which is bad for Tim. So in the PC Gamer interview, he talks about AI's place in the workflow in the games industry, talking about how it can be used for drudge work, which is actually something I've talked about. I do think there is a very legitimate use case of AI when it comes to, like, just bulk garbage time work that isn't occupied by an actual, like, position in the company. It's people that have other positions that get forced to do, like, the tedious grunt work that's just served as, like, background tasks and shit. And that can be handled by AI without negatively impacting anyone or the product itself. That would be it being utilized as an actual tool. And from what I was reading, there's not like a mandatory AI disclosure if you use AI as a tool. It's only when it's AI-generated assets. So that wouldn't even get flagged as like a necessary AI disclosure there, if it's utilized in that way. Anyway, though, he goes on to say that if you want to launch a game and get it as widely publicized as possible, you've got to put it on Steam so people can wishlist it, and if you want to play it on Steam, then you have to get this scarlet letter of AI attached to your product, and now there's a hater community trying to kill the game. I think it's really irresponsible of Valve. They shouldn't do it because it makes much harder for a game developer to have a chance of success. You have to choose from either not using tools that can make you way more productive and probably failing due to competition that does. I mean, not really, though. If the competition is using AI and getting the AI disclosure, aren't they getting that scarlet letter too, Tim? So, like, they'd be having the same problems you're describing. So, in order to stand out from the competition, wouldn't the natural thing to do be to avoid those tools? That way you don't have that, and people would appreciate that? I don't even think his argument really makes sense, because it's not irresponsible in any way. You're just giving consumers a choice. By putting that tag on there, you are just informing them that there is AI usage there, and the consumers that don't care, that tag doesn't matter. They'll still buy it. The ones that do care, maybe they avoid it. All it is just giving them more information so that way they can better decide what they want to spend their money on. That's all. I think the real meat of the issue here for Tim is that since AI isn't received overly well, he'd rather there not be a disclosure, so that way it's not front-facing, so he's not losing money when their games that they have do have AI in there. I think that's the big thing, because it would affect his wallet. It would affect their sales, because there are a lot of people that will not buy something that has an AI disclosure. That's entirely up to them. Tim would rather you not know and spend your money on it, is the feeling I get here. Has nothing to do about, like, think about the little guy not using the AI tools, the competition, that kind of thing, and then the Scarlet Letter if they do, oh no. I think the real motive is pretty clear. Tim loves AI. He sees a very strong future of AI in their products. Thus, if there's an AI disclosure, there's a lot of people that will immediately just not buy it, which hurts their financials. So he'd rather it just not exist and not be normalized. I think that's the truth behind it. Tim is on a crusade to try and get AI ham-fisted into the mainstream gaming consciousness as a positive thing. So a couple hours ago, he also made a statement, and by statement I mean tweet. This guy is fucking addicted to Twitter. It's his heroin. Talking about how AI could have helped Destiny stay profitable. So with Destiny 2 being shut down, one of the things was how much content it needed and how tedious and like how time consuming that was. So Tim got sassy and said, if only some sort of newfangled technology could have come along and make it possible to overcome bullet point number 1 and enable games like Destiny to thrive. So bullet point number 1 was about like how time consuming and expensive it was to keep introducing so much new content so it didn't get stale. And the report talked about how Destiny was only ever occasionally profitable because it kept having to make new content to keep players hooked. So Tim was saying how easily AI could have solved that. I'm pretty confident Tim Sweeney doesn't play games. I think I even remember him openly saying that he rarely plays games on an interview like a while ago. But anyway, the take is use AI. Just AI slopify shit in order to get content out as quickly as possible. The audience will eat it up. Eating out of the palm of your hand, that'll solve the issue. But that's not what people want, man. Like, if you actually played games, you would know people don't want just, like, lazily dog shit trash just for the sake of having new stimulation there. Like, sure, there is probably some people that don't mind, but on the whole, that is worse than having nothing. So, like, that wouldn't have solved Destiny's issue of, like, needing high-quality content to keep players hooked. And you could see the result. Like, the proof is in the pudding. When they weren't making high-quality new content and instead were making lazy, not good content, they were hemorrhaging players. They weren't sticking around. AI wouldn't have been making new, interesting content. Now, if your argument is, like, maybe using AI as a tool to do some, like, I don't know, like, background work somewhere so they could focus on good stuff, I highly doubt that would have saved them. It would have all of a sudden pushed them so far into the green they'd be shitting out $100 bills or anything. Because the drudge work, as Tim calls it, was not the bulk of what Destiny 2 required. So I don't think that's where most of their time and resources went to, like, doing this background drudge work. All of those resources were invested into trying to make fun, engaging, creative content to keep the players hooked and invested in this world, because that's what they expected. They expect high-quality work from the Destiny 2 universe. And AI can't do that. It can't. No matter how much Tim wants to delude himself into thinking it can, the reality is it can't. So even if it was doing, like, the drudge work, I don't think that all of a sudden saves Destiny 2, giving them more time to focus on the creative stuff, because they were still actively doing the creative stuff while others were doing the drudge work. So, like, I think he's just wrong, is the point I'm making. But he constantly tries to chirp up any time he even sees AI's good name being besmirched. About, like, well, actually, AI is really good, and this could have solved, like, every problem imaginable here in the games industry. Did you guys know that? Like, actually, did you know that? Also, you're gonna shop in the Epic Games Store? What do you mean, no? Like, it's just constant. Every take he's been giving over the last, like, 6 months has just been eye-rolling. Anyone remember this little number from the bad take factory that is Tim Sweeney's brain? He had this little humdinger where he put his elbow grease into defending AI-generated imagery on Twitter, where during this time there was a huge conversation around something disgusting that was happening, where a lot of people were generating AI child porn and flooding the site with it. And there was a conversation about, like, well, what do we do about it? And then the idea about, like, maybe banning Twitter if something's not done got brought up. So Tim Sweeney came in from the top turnbuckle and said, nope, that would be gatekeeping. Tim was really firing on all cylinders there. He was in the kitchen whipping up something fierce. He was cooking. His point was, AI is known to sometimes go off the rails, which I already think is really weird that he's going to bat trying to minimize how big of a deal that generating AI images of child sex abuse material and having it spread throughout Twitter as like a very big thing that was happening at the time is just the same as like a little hiccup with new technology. Like, oh yeah, new tech, AI, you know, sometimes it does go a little cattywampus. It gets a little weird, but we can't be gate.
I'll savor this.
No time to waste.
Let's finish this quickly.
No time to waste.
Keeping, and it'll lead to like censored political opponents, it stifles free speech, that kind of thing, because the conversation was about like something needs to be done here, so they were talking about like banning Twitter until it's fixed. And Tim's whole thing was, nope, we can't do anything about that. It'll eventually get worked out. It's just, you know, a little bump in the road we got to work through. And it's like, I don't know why he's not taking it seriously. Like, it is a big deal. That's a huge fucking deplorable thing that's going on here. And yeah, Twitter needs to do something about it to stop that shit from happening. And if Twitter had refused or continued to just sit idly by on their hands, thumb up their ass, and just allow it to persist, then yeah, Twitter should be banned. It's not free speech to just be generating child sex abuse material, Tim. Like, there needed to be some action prompted. So yeah, threatening like, hey, if you guys don't do something, you will be taken off the app stores, I think makes sense. I don't know why he had such a hard pushback against that. Twitter needed to do something. And I think that was a very natural progression to take. Like, hey, there is a problem with AI generating child porn on your platform. We will ban it if action isn't taken. That checks out to me. I don't know why it didn't to Tim Sweeney, and I don't know why he so adamantly fought about, you know, this is gatekeeping and trying to, like, minimize how big of a deal that problem was. Very odd. Point is, Tim Sweeney's a dweeb. I have not been a Tim Sweeney fan here for a little while, and he is going ballistic now with more and more takes I completely disagree with over the last, like, only few weeks, really. So yeah, I just wanted to yap about it a bit. That's it. See ya. I wasn't around to witness the extinction of the dinosaurs, nor was I there to see the death of the final saber-toothed tiger. But boy howdy, I am lucky enough to be here to witness the extinction of physical games. I swear, Sony treats physical...
I will remember your name and shout it to the heavens.
Every uncontacted tribe that still exists. According to experts, there are at least 100 known uncontacted tribes living on Earth today. However, the true number of uncontacted tribes is actually completely unknown. We know that a majority of these uncontacted tribes likely live in the Amazonian rainforest, but beyond that, information is limited, but not non-existent. Which is why in this video, I'm going to be discussing a small number of some of the most interesting and notable uncontacted or minimally contacted tribes that exist on Earth to this day. Starting with the most notable and famous and slowly getting more obscure and uncontacted as the video goes on, the Sentinelese. In recent years, the Sentinelese tribe have become one of the most, if not the most, commonly known uncontacted tribe in the entire world. However, almost paradoxically, very little is known about the actual tribe themselves, making them both one of the most famous and also mysterious uncontacted tribes to ever exist. North Sentinel Island itself exists in the Bay of Bengal. And interestingly, even though the island itself is much closer to Myanmar than it is to India, the island is under Indian jurisdiction, which will become relevant later. The island, besides being remote, existing hundreds of kilometers away from any continental landmass, is also rather small, spanning roughly only 60 square kilometers in total size, making it roughly the same size as Manhattan. And with those basic facts out of the way, we kind of start to get into the limitation of the knowledge we know. For example, still today in 2026, we don't know an exact or even a rough population estimate for the Sentinelese people. The current best guess is anywhere from 15 to 500. And if that number sounds vague, you're right, it's because it is. Experts who have spent years trying to study the possible history and lineage of the Sentinelese people also don't have many answers for us. Currently, we still have no understanding about the language that the Sentinelese people speak, or their possible ethnic lineage. And while some experts believe that the Sentinelese people could be related to the nearby Jarawa people or the Onge people, this, unfortunately, is unconfirmed. Early historical sightings of the Sentinelese people do date back all the way to the late 1700s and early 1800s. However, from the discovery of the Sentinelese people by British colonists, we still haven't gained much more information than what they initially observed. And what they described was a simplistic hunter-gatherer type people that lived on the island's forest and coastal resources for survival. It's been reported that the Sentinelese hunt fish in shallow waters, gather edible plants using handmade tools, and hunt land animals using bows and arrows. Most times the Sentinelese people have been spotted, they've either been naked or minimally clothed. However, some Sentinelese individuals have been seen wearing red paint on their face and body. And interestingly, it's believed by some scientists that the Sentinelese people are actually experiencing something known as insular dwarfism, or the island effect, which is essentially something that happens to a group of people or animals that live on a small, secluded island. Resources are usually limited, and therefore their development and growth is usually limited. And this has been theorized because almost every Sentinelese individual that's been spotted has had a height that's no taller than 5'3" or 5'5". And while these could simply be due to genetic heritage, it is believed that either nutrition or insular dwarfism is at play. From their first observation in the 1770s up until 2018, global recognition of the Sentinelese people, or even North Sentinel Island as an island, was relatively low. That was until one attempt to make contact went absolutely wrong. You see, even though in 1957 the Indian government declared North Sentinel Island be a tribal reserve with a ban on any photography of the island or traveling anywhere within 5 kilometers of the island, that doesn't mean that these rules have never been broken. In 1991, there was actually a notable expedition to North Sentinel Island that was positive and unviolent, one of the only instances of its kind. However, most of the evidence of this trip was actually deliberately deleted. You see, after a group of anthropologists were not only able to make contact, but peaceful contact with the Sentinelese people, they continued to visit them every so often to deliver coconuts and to try to even plant coconuts on the island. However, in 1994, the Indian government deliberately shut down the program as they believed it could lead to an existential threat to the Sentinelese people. And while these encounters were peaceful and even enjoyable for the anthropologists that were present, the group that took part on these expeditions made a conscious effort to delete all of the photos they had previously posted about their endeavors, as they believed that having pictures and videos of positive experiences with the Sentinelese people could potentially lead to the Sentinelese people having a friendlier image, inspiring more people to want to visit on their own accord. Something that the Indian government, these anthropologists, and likely the Sentinelese people themselves did not want. And it was for those reasons that these coconut trips stopped, and the stories of this peaceful visit quickly faded into obscurity. But of course, and unfortunately, not every visit to North Central Island has been so peaceful. In November of 2018, tragic headlines broke when a 26-year-old American missionary traveled illegally to North Central Island with the goal of contacting, living amongst, and hopefully converting the Sentinelese tribe to Christianity. On the man's first attempt at contacting the Sentinelese people, he was met with hostility, although was able to leave with his life. However, the next attempt the missionary made to the island did not go so smoothly, and only shortly after being dropped off on the island, his body was seen being dragged by the Sentinelese people on the beach, possibly leaving a warning for any other individuals looking to intrude on the island. Some people see the Sentinelese people as a group of barbaric savages, simply looking for an opportunity to kill whenever they can get it. However, others maintain the position that the Sentinelese people are simply a tribe that are looking to have their isolation and privacy respected. And while there's a handful of evidence to support either theory, I think the stance that the Indian government takes towards North Sentinel Island is the proper one, which of course is let these people be, don't mess with them, for their own sake and your own sake. Contact with the outside world could lead literally to the end of the Sentinelese people as a whole, because of their lack of immunity of any outside germs. And this is a big reason why the Indian government has a naval patrol outside of North Central Island to prevent any intruders trying to make illegal contact. And while to this day the Sentinelese people still reside on North Sentinel Island, it's very unlikely that we'll learn any more information about them anytime soon. Okay, now if you've been following me on Instagram or you just see my random community posts on YouTube, then you would have noticed that over the past few months I've been posting teaser images about an upcoming Brody plush. I know for most of you these posts are cute and fun, but I also know for a small group of you these posts are really more annoying than exciting because you guys just want the plushes. Which is why I am so pleased to announce that right now the Trust Me Bro Brody plushes are available for purchase. Trust me when I say this has been a labor of love. I think the plushies turned out really cool, and honestly it was quite the challenge to turn a 2D object into a 3D object. And oh, also in the comments let me know what you think about my 3D helmet. My goal is to do a lot more IRL content in the future, so if you have any ideas, drop it in the comments below as well. But back to the plush. The plush is cozy, cuddly, his hat comes off, and he even says 11 different voice lines when you squeeze his head. If you've ever wanted Brody to whisper sweet nothings in your ear, or you're just looking for a new cuddle buddy, then I would encourage you to check out trustbro.com. I made the website myself, which is why it's so simple, but I think it'll get the job done. I really appreciate all cozy, cuddly, his hat comes off, and he even says 11 different voice lines when you squeeze his head. If you've ever wanted Brody to whisper sweet nothings in your ear, or you're just looking for a new cuddle buddy, then I would encourage you to check out trustbro.co. I made the website myself, which is why it's so simple, but I think it'll get the job done. I really appreciate all of your guys' support over the years, and I love this brand that I'm building, and I'm so happy you guys are on this journey with me. We've done so much already, but we're truly only just beginning. But now that you've got your personal Trust Me Bro plush, let's continue with the video. But in case the North Sentinelese were a bit too mainstream for you, let's get into some more niche, uncontacted tribes. The Awa people. The Awa tribe are an indigenous group of people living in rural Brazil, specifically in the Amazon rainforest. It is believed that there is roughly 350 members total in the entire Awa tribe. The Awa people, unfortunately, are considered highly endangered and vulnerable because of ongoing logging interests encroaching on their territory. And while, at least for now, the government is siding with their native tribes with the interest of protecting indigenous peoples, it does more or less seem that it's only a matter of time until corporate interests are able to overturn those positions. Interestingly, logging interests weren't the only conflict that the Awa people have experienced in the last little while. And during the 1800s, the Awa people adopted a whole new lifestyle simply to avoid European explorers across Brazil in the early 1800s. Starting as early as 1801, European settlers started arriving in Brazil, and with that began clearing forests to set up their own developments. However, this posed a major issue to the Awa people, because now the land that remained untouched and unshared for centuries was being seemingly transformed overnight. And it was because of this that the Awa people adopted a nomadic lifestyle, so they could not be easily tracked down or have the one place they lived be decimated, leaving them even more vulnerable. And unfortunately, these risks of the Awa people's life still exist to this very day. In the modern day, out of the roughly 350 Awa people that are suspected to remain, only 67 of them are believed to be living an uncontacted hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And that number is only suspected to decline, even after the Brazilian government claimed certain land be protected and the home of the Awa people. Enforcement has been low, causing settlers and loggers in the modern day to only push closer and closer towards the protected land and send threatening messages to the people that still reside in it. According to the Indigenous Missionary Council, from the years of 2003 to 2010, roughly 450 indigenous people were killed in the Amazon rainforest. And one notable tragedy that contributed to that rather large number was an entire Awa camp that was burned and destroyed by loggers, likely to send a message. An organization known as Survival International, a human rights organization, began to look into the loggers and settlers encroaching on the Awa people's land. And they determined that the Awa people were, quote, Earth's most threatened tribe. And while, fortunately, to this day, a small group of indigenous Awa people living a traditional lifestyle exist, their existence is threatened every single day by people that are simply looking to profit off the land that the Awa people require for life. Brazil's Awa indigenous tribe is interesting, elusive, and unfortunately extremely endangered. And while there is laws and groups and individuals passionate about helping protect and preserve the culture and livelihood of these individuals and of all tribes across Brazil, the increased violence from Brazilian loggers and settlers towards indigenous peoples definitely doesn't make their future look bright. Mashco Piro. The Mashco Piro people, also known as the Nomo people, are once again a hunter-gatherer nomadic indigenous tribe living in the Amazonian rainforest. However, this tribe specifically lives in the Peruvian part of the Amazon rainforest. The Mashco Piro people are potentially one of the only groups on this list with a population that is assumed to be rising. And that's because in 1998, the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs estimated that the total population of the Mashco Piro people were roughly 100 to 250 during that time. However, the most recent estimate we've gotten from 2024 estimates that the population is likely over 750 people, meaning this indigenous population is actually having a steady and healthy growth, which is an unexpected piece of good news. And interestingly, the Mashco Piro people are actually considered to be the most populous uncontacted tribe in the entire world. The Mashco Piro people live in some of the most remote and densely forested parts of the Amazon rainforest, and they have actively avoided all contact with non-native peoples for as long as we've had recorded history of them, which goes back surprisingly far. During the late 1800s, the Amazon rubber boom was completely disrupting the Amazon rainforest as locals and as tribespeople knew it. What the Amazon rubber boom was essentially the commercialization of rubber being sourced from the Amazon rainforest and also the coinciding genocide of indigenous peoples that took place during the same time. During the Amazon rubber boom, the Mashco Piro and other indigenous groups were either targeted and slaughtered or enslaved by rubber companies so that these rubber companies would not have any issues in terms of competition or shortage of labor. The deaths associated with this massive killing spree of native peoples is unsurprisingly undocumented, and unfortunately we truly have no idea how many indigenous peoples and tribes we lost forever. And this genocide in fact was so severe that it was believed that the Mashco Piro people were totally wiped out. That was until sightings began to arise once again in the late 1990s, starting in 1999. When a group of illegal loggers scouting the forest noticed a group of indigenous peoples. Again, in 2007, a group of ecologists filmed a group of 20 Mashco Piro people that had built an establishment on a remote beach. And this actually confirmed a previously believed theory that the Mashco Piro people would spend the dry summer months on the beach fishing, living in small leaf huts they would construct, and they would spend the long wet seasons deep in the jungle where they could avoid things like flooding. In modern times, the Mashco Piro people maintain a reputation of savagery, and their name in their local dialect literally translates to savages. It is not a name they gave themselves. As I mentioned previously, the Mashco Piro people are also known as the Nomo people, and that is a name they gave themselves, which is less derogatory. And while there are numerous cases reported where deaths were specifically attributed to the Mashco Piro people, with one example being in September of 2024 when 2 loggers were found killed by a group of Mashco Piro people, it is more or less believed this tribe is not a bloodlusting group of savages, and rather, like basically every other tribe we've discussed so far, a group of people simply looking to have their heritage and culture respected and their land unencroached upon. And whether or not violence is the solution to that issue is another debate. However, it's undeniable that these indigenous peoples have suffered suffered more than enough of their own share of violence. But I'm curious what you guys think about whether or not these tribes are as much of savages as people say, or they're simply looking to be respected and left alone. As of today, the Mashco-Piro people still live deep in the remote Amazon rainforest. And contact with the Mashco-Piro people in any way, shape, or form, including gift giving or providing food, has been outright banned by the Peruvian government, of course because of the risk of the entire tribe being wiped out due to people simply not having the immunity to modern-day germs. The Yaifo people. Following Brazil's Amazon rainforest, Papua New Guinea has the second highest concentration of indigenous uncontacted tribes on the planet. It is believed that in Papua New Guinea alone, there's possibly up to 50 or more uncontacted tribes living at this moment. And potentially one of the most notable and mysterious examples are the Yaifo people. The Yaifo people live in the septic region of Papua New Guinea. And interestingly, the government of Papua New Guinea has dedicated a large portion of their country to maintaining the ecosystem and indigenous peoples of their country, which is why a large portion of the rainforests on Papua New Guinea are actually completely restricted for outsiders, meaning if you're not a local, entry is forbidden, a practice and law that has helped preserve numerous vulnerable cultures. However, like most rules, this one was broken as well. And in 1988, the Yaifo people had their first and only ever known recorded experience with the outside world. This experience happened when a British explorer and writer, Benedict Allen, went on an expedition across the highlands of Papua New Guinea. During this expedition, he found himself with a group of people that he said, quote, had a terrifying show of strength. And they allegedly did so by performing an energetic dance, and then went on to display their bows and arrows towards Allen, causing Allen to quickly retreat. However, following his brief yet likely interesting and terrifying meeting with the Yaifo people, Benedict spent decades thinking about his experience, wishing he could contact them again. And in November of 2017, almost 30 years after his first contact and the world's first recorded contact with the Yaifo people, Benedict set back out into the highlands of Papua New Guinea looking for the Yaifo people, but unfortunately was not able to locate them. But perhaps it was for the best, for both parties. There is not much more specific knowledge known about the Yaifo people besides what is generally known amongst all of the indigenous tribes living in Papua New Guinea. However, I did want to mention the Yaifo specifically because so far they are the most uncontacted tribe that we at least have recorded evidence of existing that we can call by name. And speaking of names, if you don't know mine, it's Brody. And this channel you're watching is called Trust Me Bro. And the reason I'm introducing myself is because YouTube literally tells me that 65% of the people watching my videos aren't even subscribed. So, if you like this video or you've been watching me for a while, consider subscribing to officially become a bro today. We are well on our way to 2 million subscribers, and your subscription means a lot. And since you're down there, feel free to leave a like or leave a comment saying part 2 if you would like to see more videos on interesting and unique uncontacted tribes from around the world. And with that, let's discuss the final few tribes in this video. The Rook tribe. Flying all the way over to Vietnam, we have one of the most interesting and remote people we've discussed so far. The Rook people are a mysterious sub-ethnic group that were hidden deep in the Vietnamese jungle until some unfortunate circumstances literally blew their cover. The Rook people were so mysterious and lived in such a remote location that it wasn't until 1959 that they were even discovered by other Vietnamese people. That's right, the Rook people weren't discovered by colonists or by settlers in the 1950s. They were literally discovered by other Vietnamese people centuries, if not millennia, after their establishment. Similar to other tribes we've described in this video, the Rook people lived a simple hunter-gatherer lifestyle, although interestingly, they found themselves often living in the caves of the Vietnamese jungle, giving them a bit of a unique attribute. And interestingly, the name Rook in local dialect literally translates to cave people, obviously in reference to their lifestyle. Now, the unfortunate event that I referenced earlier was of course the Vietnam War. And during massive bombing raids that took place in Vietnam, the Rook people found themselves largely displaced. And with no other option, they began to start traveling, becoming more nomadic. And it was during their travels in 1959 when they came in contact with the Vietnamese military. The military were at first surprised and then later shocked when they had found out who they had just met. These naked people wandering the jungle were literally a tribe that had never before been seen or contacted. And following their initial experience meeting each other, Vietnamese officers did their best to try to persuade this indigenous group to try to abandon the caves that they originally settled, to move and settle in a valley where they could create communes in a less remote area. Over time, many Rook people did eventually transition their lifestyle into one that was more modern, although definitely not modern. However, over the past few decades, there has been a handful of conflicts between the Vietnamese government and the Rook people over the government trying to relocate these people. And according to the most recent figures we have as far as population, there's believed to be roughly 580 Rook people living in this commune that was established roughly 50 years ago. However, the number of Rook people still living in the jungles and caves of rural Vietnam are unknown and may remain that way forever. The Pintupi Nine. The Pintupi Nine are by far the most niche group of people we've discussed in this entire video, and their story is rather amazing. The Pintupi Nine are literally called that because they are a group of 9 Pintupi people that remained completely unaware of the massive European colonization of Australia that took place over the last couple hundred years. The Pintupi Nine lived a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle and primarily roamed near Lake Mackay and surrounding watering holes. The area that this small group traveled was rather large, meaning that it wasn't uncommon for this group to travel through the blistering Australian outback for tens of kilometers at a time simply to reach their next watering hole destination. During their time in the outback, the diet of the Pintupi Nine consisted almost solely of large lizards, rabbits, and assortment of native bush plants. And when water was sparse, animal blood would serve as their source of hydration. This extremely interesting group of only 9 indigenous people were, unsurprisingly, one large family. The family consisted of 2 co-wives and 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls. The Pintupi Nine originally did have a 10th member, however, the father of the 7 children and husband of the 2 wives died shortly after the final kids were born. The Pintupi people lived in Australia far before the European colonization, and interestingly, it took all the way up until 1984 for the last remaining uncontacted Pintupi tribe to finally be discovered. That of course being this final remaining family of 9 Pintupi individuals. The reason this one family was so far removed from every other member of the Pintupi tribe was because in the 1950s, the Australian government was rounding up all of the nomadic tribes in the outback so they could start doing military testing without risk of killing indigenous peoples. However, the Pintupi Nine were the only members of the Pintupi tribe that were not rounded up and eventually socialized into more or less modern society. And decades after that event, the Australian government officially allowed indigenous peoples to move back onto their native lands. And as these groups returned home and set up settlements, questions began to arise of whatever happened to the Pintupi family that never made it to the government roundup that happened in the 1950s. And surprisingly, it wouldn't be long until they got their answer. On a fateful day in 1984, 2 Australian campers were enjoying some time in the outback when they were approached by a mysterious man wearing nothing. And wielding a bow. The 2 campers were reasonably terrified, and out of sheer fear shot a warning shot from a shotgun into the air and drove out of the desert to a nearby settlement, where they relayed the story of seeing a naked man wielding a bow. The locals in this settlement were of Pintupi origin, and after hearing the story, these locals were curious if what the campers had experienced were potentially the long-lost members of the Pintupi tribe. The following day, the ethnic Pintupi people set up a search party and began looking in the outback for what could be the Pintupi Nine, and shortly after, they found exactly what they were looking for. At first, the meeting between the search party and the Pintupi Nine was tense. However, because of the settlers being able to speak the native Pintupi tongue, they were able to convince the Pintupi Nine to come back with them to their settlement and join them in civilized life. The 9 of them did make it back to the settlement, although out of these 9 members, not everybody assimilated to modern life as easily as others. And while 8 of the 9 Pintupi 9 found themselves adjusting quite well to modern society, one of the brothers decided that modern life simply was not for him, and decided to return back to the Australian outback by himself. And it is believed ever since he returned to the outback alone, he has not made contact or been contacted ever since. The status of that brother today remains unknown. Although, if he still remains alive in the Australian outback, that would make this one individual the last known remaining Pintupi native currently living the traditional Pintupi lifestyle. That man, in my opinion, is a legend, and I wish him all the best. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, once again, please feel free to leave a like or leave a comment below telling me you want more videos about cool, interesting, uncontacted tribes. And if you loved this video and you want to watch more bro, check out the video on screen right now. It's a video I made about ancient civilizations that just mysteriously disappeared. And if you love tribes, lost ancient civilizations you've never heard of, the Norte Chico. Typically, when you think of ancient civilizations from the Americas, you think of the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Inca. But did you know that there was an ancient civilization in South America that not only predated all of those civilizations by over 1,000 years, but was also so old that it took place during the time that the pyramids were being built? The civilization I'm about to discuss with you is so old that it is actually known as a pre-ceramic civilization, meaning that for how surprisingly technologically advanced they were, which we'll get into, their entire society lived without any form of pottery. If that's not ancient, I don't know what is. Let me explain. The Norte Chico ancient civilization was located on modern-day coastal Peru and existed roughly from 3500 BC to 1800 BC. And it's significant not only because of its mystery, but because it is considered to be one of the oldest complex civilizations to ever exist in the Americas. Academic suspicions of an ancient civilization existing in coastal Peru date all the way back to 1905. But it wasn't until the 1990s when the city of Corral, the location where the Norte Chico existed, actually started to be documented and excavated. And it wasn't until 2001 when a major publication came out revealing the findings of these excavations, which essentially proved that there was a very significant site in coastal Peru that not only had a mysterious advanced civilization living on it, but it was also extremely old. A finding that more or less shocked archaeologists at the time. Now, diving back into the Norte Chico civilization itself, let's discuss some of the facts and some of the mystery surrounding it. Factually speaking, as I mentioned earlier, the Norte Chico civilization existed during the same time when the pyramids in Egypt were being built. And interestingly, the Norte Chico people were building their own pyramid as well, in their most populous city of Corral. Now, the fact that they were building pyramids is significant on its own, but it's not only the pyramids of the Norte Chico that archaeologists awe at, because this civilization is recognized by its monumental architecture in many forms, including, obviously, its pyramids, but also its large ceremonial centers, as well as surprisingly sophisticated urban planning. It's believed that the city of Corral itself had a population of around 3,000 people, which at the time was extremely massive, considering that not long before the establishment of this civilization, the early peoples living in this location were essentially small hunter-gatherer tribes. Now, interestingly, while the Norte Chico people left plenty of architecture for archaeologists to study, they didn't leave much else, which is where a lot of the mystery kind of comes into play. As of today, there has not been any form of currency, written language, pottery, art, weapons, or even tools that have been found and associated with the Norte Chico civilization, which is extremely interesting considering how not only massive but influential the Norte Chico civilization was. And I say this because archaeologists believe that the Norte Chico people, through their architecture in the city of Corral, essentially built the foundation for other ancient civilizations to come that later spread across all of South America. Now, taking a step back and focusing on some of the artifacts that were missing, because there was no armor, weapons, or mutilated bodies found in association with the Norte Chico civilization, it is believed by historians and archaeologists that this civilization was relatively peaceful, and not only existed, but thrived off of trade rather than conquest, which is surprisingly wholesome. And this wholesomeness is kind of continued when you understand the fact that this civilization was focused more on culture than it was on warfare, because there is no record of any sort of military activity whatsoever. However, they did leave massive amphitheaters, which I could only imagine saw some of the most interesting of shows. But the fact that the civilization built massive grounds for congregation and not one wall or military base is rather interesting. I would have to assume that there was at least some musical performances going on because, interestingly, while there was extremely few artifacts that were found in the city of Corral associated with the Norte Chico people, one set of artifacts that was discovered was a set of handcrafted flutes made out of bird bones hidden in one of the pyramids, which is extremely cool. But in case being a peaceful civilization that was thriving and played the flute wasn't cool enough, there is also evidence to suggest that these people were not only chilling, but also getting a little elevated as well, if you catch my drift. The Norte Chico civilization were essentially a walking contradiction to most beliefs that were held of civilizations at this time. One, because it existed out of the primary 3 locations where it was believed that civilization was spawning from at the time, but on top of this, it was also believed that for any civilization to exist and thrive, agriculture was a vital cornerstone of that development. And while that seems logical, for Norte Chico, that wasn't necessarily the case. And that's because the Norte Chico civilization had an economy and diet heavily dependent on the nearby oceans. And while it's believed that the city of Corral had proper irrigation systems, evidence suggests that a lot of the agriculture that these irrigation systems sustained were not actually food, but cotton, likely used to produce textiles that were either sold or traded to nearby settlements. This civilization existed in a place where, for the longest time, nobody even believed there was any ancient civilizations. And besides the fact that their mere existence contradicts so much that was believed by archaeologists at the time, they also went on to not only exist, but thrive in a society that was organized, advanced, and prolific, while seemingly also being peaceful, relying on trade and seemingly entertainment, as suggested by the massive amphitheaters. I don't know about you, but I think there is just so much to love about the Norte Chico people. And in my opinion, they're kind of the underdogs of ancient civilizations, which is why I wanted to put them first on this list. Now, I think we can all agree that the mysterious aspects of these ancient civilizations are just so interesting. But not everything in life should be a mystery. Specifically, finding a healthcare professional that best suits your needs, which is why today's video is sponsored. Waiting and stop guessing and start getting the care you need today. Go to ZocDoc.com/TrustMeGrow to instantly find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/TrustMeGrow to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. Thank you so much, ZocDoc, for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's continue with some ancient civilizations. And while there is still a ton of mystery associated with the Norte Chico people, potentially one of the biggest mysteries is what exactly happened to them. And the best guess that we have as of right now was that around the time of 1800 BC, there was a gradual decline of the city of Corral and other surrounding establishments due to a decline of maritime resources and a drying up of the existing irrigation systems. And it's theorized that the Norte Chico people didn't just vanish, but actually moved north and integrated into other societies of the time. Which leads us to today. As of right now, basically everything we know is, for the most part, what I told you. However, fortunately, the city of Corral still has most of its ruins still intact to this very day, and you can go visit them. They were never destroyed and never built over. They were simply abandoned once the Norte Chico people decided it was time to move on. And honestly, I hope more information is found out about the civilization in the near future, because based on the information we have, this civilization seemed pretty cool. Göbekli Tepe. If you thought the Norte Chico was an old civilization, well, Göbekli Tepe is about to blow your mind. Göbekli Tepe, admittedly, is not a civilization. It is actually an archaeological site. And the reason it's on this list is because obviously this site was created by some civilization, but that civilization is the root of the mystery at play. The Göbekli Tepe settlement was inhabited from around 9500 BC to at least 8000 BC, which is nearly 12,000 years ago, which for context is roughly 7,000 years before the pyramids were built. Göbekli Tepe and the unknown civilization surrounding it is extremely mysterious and, in my opinion, extremely cool, which is why I knew I had to discuss it. Göbekli Tepe is located in modern-day Turkey, but interestingly, for how old this archaeological site is, it wasn't rediscovered until the 1960s. However, the true importance of this site wasn't really understood until the 1990s, meaning that this roughly 12,000-year-old secret has only just been uncovered, and we are still only scratching the surface of what it could even mean. Similar to Norte Chico, Göbekli Tepe shatters a lot of beliefs surrounding civilizations at the time, with one of the most prominent being that agriculture was mandatory for any form of civilization to exist. However, Göbekli Tepe kind of directly contradicts that, primarily because this massive archaeological site existed long before the invention of agriculture, meaning that it was built and inhabited by people that were believed to be extremely simple hunter-gatherer tribes. But this unknown mysterious civilization didn't only lack agriculture, it also lacked any form of metal tools, any form of writing, and of course, any form of pottery. And I know I've harped on pottery a couple times in this video so far, but understand that the invention of pottery was crucial to civilization at the time. However, due to the massive amount of mystery surrounding the civilization that built Göbekli Tepe, the only thing we really have to discuss at this point is what they left behind, which is, of course, this extremely impressive archaeological site, which I want to go into a bit of detail about. The site itself consists of circular enclosures built out of massive stone pillars. And not only are these pillars mysterious by default due to their sheer massive size, with some of them weighing up to 40,000 pounds, these pillars are also covered in intricate carvings of different animals and other questionable symbols. In more recent times, by alternative archaeologists, it's been speculated that these pillars were built with astronomy in mind, although that has been heavily debated. And regardless of what their true intention may or may not be, the answer is we truly don't know why it was built, and we also have no idea how it was built. As keep in mind, during this time, nearly 12,000 years ago, the wheel was not even invented yet, let alone metal tools, making the creation process itself an entirely separate, seemingly unsolvable mystery. As I mentioned earlier, today archaeologists are only beginning to crack open the case on what Göbekli Tepe could have meant, who it was made by, and what it truly all even means, not only for the civilization that created it, but also what it means for our current understanding of human history. As the discovery and study of this archaeological site has already broken so many beliefs that have been held for so long until, well, now. And it's the shattering of some of these beliefs that have been extremely controversial and, well, met with resistance from the greater archaeological community. But that is kind of outside the scope of this video. All you really need to know is that somewhere hidden in Turkey, there is an extremely interesting and unknown site built by simple hunter-gatherers nearly 12,000 years ago for reasons we don't know, with tools we don't understand, by people we can't identify. It seemed to have been used for roughly 1,000 to 2,000 years, and then it was believed by some that it was intentionally buried or abandoned and buried over time, to then only be rediscovered nearly 12,000 years later in the 1990s. And if there's one thing we know about Göbekli Tepe, it's that the people who created it definitely loved to carve animals. And honestly, they were pretty great at it. The Lycians. Staying in modern-day Turkey for just a bit longer, let's discuss the Lycians, a super interesting group of people. The civilization existed in a city known as Lycia, which geographically was located basically directly on the Mediterranean Sea. And unsurprisingly, the Lycians were known as very effective seafarers, both in trade and battle. The Lycians had a very distinct, independent culture, although there was some traceable influences from their neighbors, the Greeks and the Persians. Some of the more obvious influences from these other civilizations were the Lycian alphabet that was relatively similar to the Greek alphabet, although still distinct and to this day rather mysterious considering there's not much known about it and not much evidence of it even existing in the first place. Like, we know it exists, but there's just not much writing left from the Lycians. The Lycians also carved massive, beautiful tombs directly into stone, had massive coastal cities, and had magnificent amphitheaters, all partially inspired by the neighboring Persians and Greeks. It's reported that the Lycians existed from roughly 2000 BC to roughly 300 BC, and during this time, they were able to make massive impacts on civilization that we are still seeing to this day. Most notably, their democratic system of politics, which later went on to inspire the Romans, which later inspired the US Constitution. And that's not a joke. Focusing in specifically on the mystery of the Lycian people, not much about their origins, culture, or language are known or understood today. While the Lycians played a relatively significant role in ancient Mediterranean civilizations, no good, mysterious ancient civilization lasts forever. And such is true for Lycia. Because although they had a relatively long and significant run, the fade into obscurity from the civilization was kind of multifaceted, primarily being triggered by more or less of a cultural absorption. And what I mean by that is that Lycia was essentially subjugated by Alexander the Great, essentially taking Lycian culture and turning it into Hellenistic culture and then later Roman culture. And I believe it's for that reason that Lycian history is kind of outshined or underreported, simply because it's more or less of a blip within a much larger story that is more studied and more reported. But yeah, for as much cool ancient history there is about the ancient Greeks or ancient Persians, don't forget that between the two, there was also the ancient Lycians, who had their own interesting blend of both cultures and a dash of their own unique stuff. So while the Lycians don't really get the credit they deserve, I definitely thought it was worth mentioning them in this video, because even though they didn't necessarily bend the mind of archaeologists, they still made a major impact on human history. The Tartessians. The Tartessians are a very interesting and mysterious civilization that not only existed but flourished in modern-day Spain. Nearly everything we know about the Tartessians comes from secondhand accounts, because there is almost zero recorded literature from the Tartessians directly. However, we do have some records from the Phoenicians and later the Greeks, who often encountered and traded with the Tartessians. According to these accounts, the Tartessians were known for their extravagant wealth, primarily coming from their mining operations, metalworking, and of course trade of both of those goods. It's reported that the Tartessians lived in a kingdom known as Tartessos. No, not tartar sauce, Tartessos. It's believed that Tartessos existed from roughly 9th century to 5th century BC. And interestingly, unlike basically every other civilization we've discussed, the evidence around the disappearance of the Tartessians does not suggest a gradual decline whatsoever. It actually suggests an abrupt vanishing of the entire civilization, for reasons we'll get into in a moment. The first major Tartessian site that was excavated happened all the way back in 1930, but it wasn't until 1978 when more significant findings happened. And even today, archaeologists are still excavating more Tartessian sites, with one recent notable excavation happening happening only in 2015. Historians and archaeologists describe Tartessos as one of the first true Western European civilizations. Now, diving back into the whole mystery aspect, out of all of the reference that we have to the Tartessians in texts from other civilizations, we really only have the name of one figure. He was a king named Argantonios, and this dude was dripped out. Not only was he pictured wearing a gold hat, a gold belt, gold arm cuffs, but this dude also had a gold chain and gold nipple covers. But here's the deal. What makes the Tartessians so interesting is simply how they had seemingly everything going for them. They were a strong, rich, advanced civilization that were reported to have not only magnificent metal reserves, specifically silver and gold, but also advanced architecture. And on top of being developed, well-planned, and wealthy, they also had great strategic trade relations with the Greeks and Phoenicians. And on top of that, Tartessos was in a very geographically strategic location as well. However, even with all of this working in their favor, they still ended up having a relatively short run as a civilization. Essentially, none of their own personal records have ever been discovered, and most importantly, it's believed that they basically vanished seemingly overnight. And I know I teased it earlier, so now let's actually discuss the theories on what could have happened to the Tartessians. And well, obviously, nobody knows for sure. There is a few primary theories. The first, and potentially most likely, being that there was a massive economic collapse due to either mining or trade disruptions in the area. Another theory suggests that there was ongoing internal conflicts that ended up leading to political collapse, which left the area vulnerable to essentially be absorbed by neighboring societies. But besides those